Do not let him walk into that room. The voice was small, but it cut through the marble hallway with the kind of clarity that made grown men stop pretending they hadn't heard it. Ethan Carlyle slowed mid-step, one hand still near the polished bronze handle of the boardroom door, his reflection stretched across the glass wall beside him. Around him, everything in the corridor seemed built to make a man feel larger than life. 12-foot ceilings, cold white light, black marble floors buffed to a mirror shine, assistants moving fast in quiet heels, security in tailored jackets, the muted hum of central air flowing through hidden vents. And right there in the middle of all that money and motion stood a little black girl in worn sneakers with silver stars peeling off the toes, her braids pulled back with blue beads, a visitor badge resting crooked against her hoodie. She could not have been older than 9. Ethan turned fully now, more surprised than irritated, though the surprise did not soften his face. Men like him were not used to being interrupted, especially not seconds before a board meeting that could shift the future of a multi-billion-dollar company. His silver watch caught the overhead light as he lowered his hand. "Whose child is this?" one of the executives murmured, not even trying to hide the annoyance in his voice. Another gave a short laugh, the kind people use when they assume reality is about to correct itself. The girl did not move. Her chin lifted just enough to keep her eyes level with Ethan's face, and there was something about the steadiness in that look that made the laughter die faster than it should have. "Sir," she said again, quieter this time, but somehow more commanding, "they changed your papers." The words landed like a dropped glass in a silent church. Ethan's gaze sharpened. Behind him, the boardroom doors reflected the whole strange scene back at them. A billionaire in a charcoal suit, 6 executives in navy and black, 2 assistants holding tablets, 1 head of security shifting his weight, and 1 9-year-old girl standing like a human stop sign in the center of a hallway built for power. "Changed what papers?" Ethan asked. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The entire floor already knew how to listen when he spoke. The girl swallowed. Once, then pointed, not at him, but at the gray folder tucked under the arm of his chief legal officer, Victoria Hale. Victoria's expression did not crack, but it cooled. "That one," the girl said. "Not the blue one. The gray one. The back pages are wrong." For a moment, nobody moved. Ethan looked at the folder, then at Victoria, then back at the child. "Security," Victoria said smoothly, her voice clipped and elegant. "Please take her downstairs and locate her parent. Mr. Carlyle does not have time for this." But Ethan still hadn't looked away from the little girl. Something in her tone had snagged his attention, something too precise to dismiss and too calm to call childish panic. She was not babbling. She was not guessing. She looked like a person holding on to a truth with both hands. "What's your name?" he asked. "Nia Brooks." "How old are you, Nia?" 9, sir." A few of the men exchanged glances at that, as if the number itself should have ended the conversation. It didn't. Nia kept her eyes on Ethan and took one small step closer, enough for the beads at the ends of her braids to click softly in the cold air. "If you take the gray copy into that room," she said, "you're going to sign the wrong version." This time there was no laughter at all. One of the assistants lowered her tablet. Ethan's jaw shifted almost imperceptibly. "And how?" Victoria asked, each word polished to a shine. "Would a 9-year-old child know anything about board documents?" Nia finally looked at her. It was not a defiant look. It was worse. It was a look of recognition, the kind that said, "I saw you when you thought nobody mattered enough to notice." "Because last night," Nia said, "my mom was cleaning the copy room on 27, and I was waiting for her by the window, and I saw you switch the back section by hand." The hallway seemed to lose temperature. Victoria's smile held for half a second too long. Ethan noticed that. He noticed everything. "That's absurd," Victoria said. "She's confused." "No, ma'am," Nia replied, and her voice stayed gentle, which somehow made it harder to interrupt. "The staple was crooked after you fixed it, and page 48 has a different footer than page 47. The font changes in the annex too. You were in a hurry." Ethan's hand dropped from the door completely now. The room behind the glass could wait. The people inside could wait. The whole floor could wait. Because for the first time that morning, the most powerful man in the building was no longer thinking about the deal. He was thinking about the child in front of him, the gray folder under Victoria Hale's arm, and the dangerous possibility that the only person who had truly been watching was a little girl everyone else had already decided did not belong there. Victoria Hale did not blink right away. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. Not the folder in her arm, not the assistant standing suddenly too still, not even the low electric tension spreading through the hallway like cold water under a locked door. It was that pause, that tiny delay in the face of a woman whose entire career had been built on precision. Nia noticed it too. Her small fingers tightened around the frayed hem of her hoodie, but her chin stayed up. Somewhere behind them, an elevator bell chimed softly, and the sound felt almost absurd in the silence that followed. Ethan extended his hand toward Victoria without taking his eyes off her. "Give me the folder." His voice was calm, but the corridor shifted around it. Men who had spent years learning to read his moods suddenly looked at the floor, at their watches, at their tablets, anywhere but his face. Victoria let out a breath through her nose, controlled and elegant. "Ethan, this is becoming ridiculous. We are 5 minutes from a vote. Then we have 5 minutes to make sure I am not walking in blind." He held out his hand again. This time, she had no choice. The gray folder passed from her manicured fingers to his. Ethan opened it there in the hallway, the polished marble throwing pale light up against the underside of the pages. Nia did not move. She watched him the way a child watches a stove she knows is hot, with fear and certainty mixed together. Ethan flipped the first few pages quickly. Cover sheet, summary memo, meeting agenda, signature tabs. Nothing unusual. One of the executives gave a faint, almost relieved exhale. Victoria caught it and seemed to regain a little of her poise. "You see," she said softly. "A child overheard a conversation and built a fantasy around it. This company cannot stop every time someone points at a stack of paper." But Ethan was not listening now. He turned to the annex section at the back and slowed. Page 46. 47. His thumb paused on 48. The footer was different. Small. Clean. Easy to miss if you were moving too fast. But not the same. He flipped back. Then forward again. The font in the lower margin shifted half a shade narrower. The staple near the top left corner sat slightly off-center, pressed through with the uneven angle of a quick repair. Ethan said nothing, and that silence was worse than anger. Nia could hear her own heartbeat now, not loud, just steady, like shoes tapping in an empty hall. She thought of the copy room from the night before. The humming fluorescent light, the smell of toner and lemon cleaner. Her mother, Denise, down the corridor wiping fingerprints from glass panels no one ever thanked her for. Nia had been perched on a vinyl chair by the print station with a library book in her lap, waiting for the last half hour of the shift to pass. That was when Victoria Hale had come in alone, carrying a navy folder and looking over both shoulders before setting it on the counter. Nia had looked down at her book at first. Children learned early when adults preferred them invisible. But then she heard paper sliding, heard the quick metallic click of a staple remover, and glanced up through the gap beneath her curls. Victoria had taken out a cluster of pages, replaced them with another set from a gray sleeve, and pressed the stack back together by hand. Fast, confident, practiced. Nia remembered the exact sound, not the neat flat bite of a machine stapler. The crooked crunch of someone forcing a fix because they did not have time to do it twice. "Tell him now, and they will blame your mother," she had heard Victoria whisper into her phone before leaving the room. "He never checks the annex under pressure." Back in the hallway, Nia felt the memory rise cold in her chest. She had said nothing all night, not because she had forgotten, because she had heard the second part too. Her mother needed this job. Rent was due in 11 days. The power bill was already sitting on the kitchen counter under a magnet shaped like a peach. Denise Brooks had worked too many double shifts to lose everything because her daughter spoke at the wrong time. Ethan turned another page, then another. His expression did not collapse. It sharpened. "Daniel," he said without looking up. From behind the line of executives, General Counsel Daniel Mercer stepped forward, already reaching for the file. Ethan handed it to him. "Compare the annex footer and pull the server version." Daniel nodded once and moved fast, tablet already in hand. Victoria folded her arms. "This proves nothing. Drafts change. Formatting shifts. Assistants print from different machines." "Then why was the staple replaced by hand?" Nia asked. Her voice was small again, but nobody dared laugh now. Victoria looked at her, and for the first time the warmth was gone completely. You should be downstairs with your parent. Nia swallowed, and answered with the plain honesty only children can carry without dressing it up. I was going to stay quiet. But then I saw him holding the folder. Ethan looked at her then, really looked, as if the hallway had narrowed to just the two of them. In the reflection of the glass wall, he could see her star-scuffed shoes, the crooked badge, the blue beads at the ends of her braids, and the fear she was fighting not to show. Not fear of being wrong. Fear of telling the truth in a building where truth had a dress code, a title, and a corner office. Daniel's tablet chimed. He stared at the screen, then lifted his eyes slowly toward Ethan. There are two versions, he said, and the one on the server does not match the one in your hand. No one in the corridor breathed for a full second. Then Ethan closed the folder with quiet care and turned, very slowly, toward Victoria Hale. Daniel Mercer did not repeat himself. He did not need to. The words stayed in the hallway like a crack spreading under glass. Two versions. Not a theory. Not a nervous child guessing above her age. Two versions. Ethan Carlyle held Victoria Hale's gaze for a long second, and something old and disciplined settled behind his eyes. He was not a man who reacted quickly in public. He had built too much, lost too much, and survived too many rooms full of smiling people to waste emotion where observation would do more damage. Around them, the 28th floor had gone strangely still. Assistants who usually moved like they were timed by a metronome now stood with their tablets lowered. A security guard shifted once, then stopped. Even the soft hum of the ventilation system seemed louder than it had a minute ago. Nia Brooks felt it all from where she stood near the glass wall, small and steady in the white light, the visitor badge brushing against her hoodie every time she breathed. She knew this kind of silence. It was not the kind that meant peace. It was the kind that came right before adults decided who mattered and who would be blamed. Victoria recovered first. She always did. Her chin lifted half an inch, and when she spoke her voice came out smooth, almost amused, as if she were the only person in the hallway capable of staying rational. Daniel is comparing an archived server copy to a hand-prepped executive set. That happens all the time before a vote. Markups move. Formatting changes. We are standing here because a child wandered into a restricted area and made an accusation she cannot possibly understand. Nia felt heat rise in her cheeks at the word child, not because it was untrue, but because of the way Victoria used it, as if being young meant being automatically wrong. Ethan did not look at Nia. He kept looking at Victoria, then explained the duplicate annex. Victoria folded her arms lightly, elegant as ever. Support staff prepared the binders after midnight. Someone likely printed an outdated section. Sloppy, yes. Criminal, no. Her eyes flicked at Nia then, only for an instant, but the message was clear enough. This ends now. Go downstairs. Be small again. Nia almost looked away. Almost. Then she remembered the copy room. The smell of warm paper. The scratch of Victoria's sleeve against the laminate counter. The whispered phone call. He never checks the annex under pressure. It had not sounded like a mistake. It had sounded like a plan. Daniel tapped his screen, then enlarged two file windows side by side. His face had gone pale in that quiet professional way lawyers wore when they knew the facts were getting expensive. The server copy was accessed at 9:12 last night, he said. The edited version in this folder was printed at 9:27 from a guest terminal on 27. The footer code does not match legal document control. No one spoke. Ethan held out his hand. Daniel gave him the tablet. Nia could not see the full screen from where she stood, only blocks of text and the small timestamps glowing in corporate blue, but she did not need to. Ethan's expression changed by less than most people would notice. His mouth did not tighten. His brows did not rise. But the warmth disappeared from his face completely, and that was enough to make two senior executives take a subtle step backward. Behind Ethan, the boardroom doors remained closed, bronze handles catching light, the meeting inside delayed by a truth that had chosen the hallway instead. Nia's heart beat hard enough now that she could hear it in her ears. She thought of her mother somewhere below on another floor, probably wondering why she had not come back from the restroom yet. Denise Brooks never liked Nia wandering. Not because Nia was reckless, but because buildings like this had rules children learned without anyone speaking them out loud. Stay close. Touch nothing. Be polite. Leave no reason for anyone to remember you were here. Nia had broken every one of those rules in less than 3 minutes. Who had access to the guest terminal? Ethan asked. Daniel glanced down again. The login was entered manually. No badge swipe. Victoria let out a soft breath, almost a laugh. So now we are chasing ghosts. Ethan, with respect, this is exactly why major decisions should not be derailed by impulse. Impulse, Ethan repeated. The word was so quiet it made the hallway lean toward him. He handed the tablet back to Daniel and turned at last to Nia. She braced herself without meaning to. But when he spoke, his voice was not sharp. It was measured, careful, as though he were stepping around something fragile and trying not to make it break. Nia, when you saw her in the copy room last night, were you alone? Nia blinked. Out of everything he could have asked, she had not expected that. My mom was down the hall, sir. She was cleaning the conference glass. Did your mother see anything? No, sir. Ethan nodded once. Not disappointment. Just placement. One more fact set where it belonged. Victoria moved quickly to fill the space. There. Thank you. We are now relying on the memory of a 9-year-old who admits there were no witnesses. Nia felt the sting of that, but something in Ethan's face stopped her from shrinking under it. He was not done. What made you so certain it was this folder? He asked. Nia looked at the gray binder under his hand, then back at him. Her voice came softer now, but steadier than before. Because the blue one had a silver clip inside the cover, and this one does not. And because the page she changed had a coffee mark in the bottom corner. It looked like a half moon. The server copy on his tablet does not have it because that was the clean version. But the one she swapped in did. Daniel's head snapped up. Page 48, he said. He flipped the folder open, turned, then stopped. There it was. Faint. Brown. A pale crescent near the lower edge of the paper. Too small for drama. Too ordinary to invent. The corridor went still all over again. Only deeper this time, because now the truth was no longer digital or abstract. It was physical. It had weight. It had paper fibers and toner and a stain left by someone's careless cup. Ethan looked at the mark for one long second, then closed the folder with deliberate care. When he raised his eyes to Victoria, there was nothing uncertain left in them. Cancel the vote, he said. No one moved. Then he added, just as quietly, and pull the hallway camera footage from 27 between 9 and 9:30 last night. Victoria's composure did not shatter. That would have been easier for everyone. Instead it thinned, almost invisibly, like ice warming from underneath. Nia saw it happen. The perfect posture. The polished calm. The certainty that people like her could manage the truth if they held the room long enough. It did not vanish all at once. It just stopped looking invincible. And for the first time since she had stepped in front of that boardroom door, Nia Brooks allowed herself to believe that the most powerful thing in the building might not be the billionaire, or the lawyer, or the deal waiting behind the glass. It might be the simple fact that she had seen what no one expected her to see, and she had told the truth before fear could teach her to swallow it. The order moved through the hallway faster than sound. Cancel the vote. Pull the camera footage. In a building where people lived by calendars, signatures, and polished certainty, those 8 words landed like a storm front. Assistants who had spent the last 20 minutes whispering into wireless headsets suddenly went quiet. 2 board members who had just stepped off the private elevator slowed when they saw Ethan Carlisle still standing outside the room, the doors unopened, the meeting frozen before it could begin. Nia Brooks remained where she was near the glass wall, her shoulders small under the oversized hoodie, trying not to fidget under the attention that had finally turned in her direction. She was not used to being looked at like this. Most days, grown-ups in expensive places looked through her, past her, around her. Now every eye on the 28th floor seemed to understand that the little girl in star-scuffed sneakers had just done something none of them had managed to do. She had made Ethan Carlisle stop. Daniel Mercer was already 3 steps away, speaking low into his phone as he headed toward the legal support office at the far end of the corridor. I want the surveillance pull from copy room 27, hallway access, and the guest terminal logs, he said. Now means now. His tone was controlled, but there was steel in it, and steel spread quickly through corporate walls. Victoria Hale stood motionless for one dangerous second too long. Then she adjusted the cuff of her cream blazer and let out a measured breath, as if she were the only adult left capable of preserving dignity in a room that had misplaced it. Ethan, she said, voice soft enough that most men would have mistaken it for calm. You are making a serious error by turning procedural noise into spectacle. We have investors flying in from San Francisco, Boston, and Miami. We have a schedule. We have fiduciary obligations. And we are standing here because a child says she saw a paper switch and a coffee stain. Ethan turned toward her fully now. The glass behind him caught his reflection and doubled it, one man becoming two in the morning light. No, he said. We are standing here because a child noticed what my legal team did not. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Victoria's face remained arranged in the same elegant lines, but something in the air around her changed. Authority had not left her. Not yet, but certainly had. Nia felt that shift like a draft along the floor. She had seen that kind of thing before in smaller ways. A teacher who said one thing, then checked the answer key and spoke softer after. A cashier who assumed her mother did not have enough money, then smiled too brightly once the card went through. The moment before adults corrected themselves was always the strangest part. Not because they apologized. Most of them did not. But because for 1 second, the world looked back at itself and realized it had been wrong. Denise Brooks stepped out of the service elevator at the end of the hall. Just then, one yellow cleaning cloth still tucked into the pocket of her gray work apron. She had probably come looking for Nia after too many minutes passed without her daughter returning from the restroom. Denise took 3 quick steps forward before stopping cold at the sight in front of her. Executives in tailored suits, security holding position, Ethan Carlisle at the center of it all, and her 9-year-old standing in the middle of a halted board meeting floor like she belonged there. Nia? The word came out barely above a whisper, but Nia turned instantly. The fear she had been holding so carefully inside her chest rose all at once when she saw her mother's face. Not anger. Worse. Worry. The deep, tired kind that came from living one mistake away from trouble. Denise's eyes moved from Nia to Ethan, then to Victoria, then to the gray folder in Ethan's hand. I am so sorry, sir, she said quickly, already walking forward. She was supposed to stay downstairs with me. She knows not to wander. Nia, baby, come here. Nia's feet almost obeyed on instinct. But then Ethan spoke before she could move. Ms. Brooks, your daughter may have just prevented a fraudulent vote. Denise stopped so abruptly that the cloth in her apron pocket slipped halfway out. She blinked once, as if she had heard the sentence in the wrong language. I am sorry. Ethan's voice stayed even. She brought a serious document issue to my attention. Denise looked at Nia again, and this time confusion joined the worry. Nia saw it happen in real time. Her mother trying to calculate what version of the truth had unfolded while she was cleaning fingerprints off conference glass down on 26. She was with me last night, Denise said slowly. In the copy hallway for a little while. I did not know she saw anything. Victoria stepped in immediately, as if the opening had been laid at her feet. Exactly. She saw something she did not understand and attached meaning to it. This has gone far enough. Denise's posture tightened. Years of low-wage jobs had taught her how to hear dismissal even when it wore perfume and careful grammar. My daughter does not make up stories, she said, her voice quiet now, but firm enough to make one of the assistants glance up. Victoria gave a small smile that never reached her eyes. I am sure she believes what she thinks she saw. Nia watched her mother flinch, not outwardly, not in a way these people would notice, but in the old place where disrespect landed hardest because you had learned to endure it without letting it show. Ethan noticed. Something darkened in his expression. He had spent enough years around polished contempt to recognize it when it came dressed as professionalism. That will be enough, he said. Victoria looked at him. Excuse me. You heard me. Ethan's eyes did not leave hers. You will not talk around them as if they are not standing here. The hallway went still in a new way then, not sharp this time, but heavy. Denise lowered her gaze for half a second, not in submission, but because unexpected dignity can hit a person harder than insult. Nia felt her own throat tighten. She had not expected that. Not from him. Not from anyone in this building. At the end of the corridor, Daniel reappeared with a lean technician from building security carrying a tablet dock and portable screen. The technician moved quickly but carefully, setting the equipment on a narrow marble console table beneath a wall sculpture no one ever really looked at. A charging light blinked blue. The screen came alive. Timestamps rolled across the bottom. We have hallway footage from 27, Daniel said. Copy room exterior and interior angle through the glass panel. Limited audio. No cuts. Victoria's posture changed so slightly that most people missed it. Nia did not. It was in the shoulders. Not slumped. Not stiff. Just held a fraction too still. The way people stand when they are trying not to react before they know what has already been caught. Ethan stepped toward the screen. Denise reached for Nia without taking her eyes off it, and Nia slipped her hand into her mother's palm. It felt warm and a little damp from work, the smell of lemon cleaner and fabric softener still clinging to her skin. For 1 second Nia was just a child again, small hand in her mother's hand, standing in a place too cold and too expensive and too dangerous to feel safe. Then the footage loaded. Black and white at first. Grainy. Timestamp. 9:21 p.m. Copy hallway 27. The corridor appeared empty. The vending alcove. The printer station. The chair by the window where Nia had been sitting with her library book. Then a figure entered the frame in a pale blazer carrying 2 folders, one navy, one gray. No one in the hallway breathed. And on the screen, Victoria Hale reached for the copy room door. On the screen, the woman everyone on the 28th floor knew for her immaculate timing and flawless judgment stepped into the copy room at 9:21 p.m., carrying 2 folders and looking over her shoulder before the door eased shut behind her. Nobody spoke. The portable monitor cast a cold blue light across the marble wall, turning every face in the hallway slightly pale, slightly unreal. Nia stood pressed close to her mother now, one small hand wrapped around Denise Brooks's fingers, but her eyes never left the screen. She did not feel triumphant. She felt the way she had felt the first time she corrected a teacher who had marked the wrong answer right on a math test. Sick first, certain second. The footage jumped ahead by seconds, grainy but clear enough. Victoria moved to the copier station. She set the navy folder down, then the gray one. She opened both. Her hands worked quickly, neatly, with the practiced rhythm of someone who had done delicate things under pressure before. Page stack out. Page stack in. A metal staple remover flashed in her hand for half a second under the fluorescent glare. Then came the motion Nia had described. Not the flat press of a machine, but the awkward push of a handheld stapler forced through paper at a slight angle. Even without sound, the room could almost hear it. Ethan Carlyle did not move. He stood with one hand in his pocket and the other resting against the edge of the marble console, his eyes fixed on the screen with the stillness of a man who had learned long ago that rage was less useful than memory. Around him, the executives who had laughed when a 9-year-old blocked a boardroom door now looked as if they wished they had been anywhere else in Manhattan. Daniel Mercer reached over and froze the frame just as Victoria slid a replacement section into the gray binder. The image held. Her profile. Her hands. The folder. The page stack midway through the switch. No theory left. No gap wide enough for polite explanations. Denise drew in a breath so quietly that only Nia felt it through their joined hands. Her mother had worked in buildings like this for years. She knew the smell of carpet glue and copier heat, knew which conference rooms got used by people important enough to leave half-drunk coffee in crystal glasses instead of paper cups, knew how quickly blame traveled downward when something expensive went wrong. But this was different. This time the truth was moving upward, and even Denise looked startled by that. Victoria let the silence stretch, perhaps hoping that if she looked steady enough, the room would borrow its courage from her. When she finally spoke, her voice came measured, almost bored. This proves the document was handled. It does not prove intent. Daniel turned toward her first, disbelief flickering across his face before he covered it. You replaced an annex in a live executive binder less than 12 hours before a vote. I corrected a draft inconsistency, Victoria replied. That is what counsel does. Ethan shifted his gaze from the screen to her, and the hallway seemed to get colder. Without notifying me? Victoria lifted one shoulder. You trust me to manage details so that you can manage outcomes. It was a dangerous answer. Too smooth. Too familiar. As if the real mistake here was not the switch itself, but the inconvenience of being caught in front of people who normally accepted her judgment without question. Nia looked up at Ethan then. He did not appear shocked anymore. Shock had passed. What remained on his face was worse for Victoria and more unsettling for everyone else. Calculation. The kind that stripped the emotion out of betrayal and measured only consequence. Play the rest, he said. The technician obeyed. The footage resumed. Victoria glanced toward the hallway camera once, only briefly, then reached for her phone. She said something no one could hear. After that, she slid the altered gray folder under her arm, picked up the navy binder, and left the copy room with both composure and speed. The timestamp rolled forward. 3 seconds later, little Nia appeared at the edge of the frame, climbing down from the vinyl chair by the window and stepping toward the glass panel after Victoria had gone. She looked tiny on the monitor, all elbows and braids and oversized hoodie, holding her library book against her chest like a shield. She peered into the room, then at the empty hallway, then down toward the conference corridor where her mother was still cleaning. She did not run after Victoria. She did not make a scene. She simply stood there in the harsh copy room light, thinking. Ethan saw that too. Everyone did. The child had not chased attention. She had carried knowledge. And she had waited until the exact moment it could no longer be ignored. Zoom in on the timestamp, Ethan said. Daniel did. 9:21 p.m. entry. 9:26 p.m. exit. The guest terminal print log had shown 9:27. The numbers locked together like teeth in a gear. Victoria looked at the enlarged screen and then away, which was the first true crack anyone had seen in her all morning. This is still being misread, she said, though the force had gone out of her tone. There were material concerns about the voting language. I was protecting the company. Ethan turned fully toward her now. By replacing the annex without disclosure, changing the control provisions, and preparing me to sign it in a room full of directors. Victoria opened her mouth, but for once no polished answer arrived in time. The silence that followed was not confusion anymore. It was recognition. Men and women who had spent years mistaking confidence for integrity were being forced to tell the difference in real time. At Ethan's side, the gray folder remained tucked under his arm like evidence that had already passed judgment. Denise's thumb brushed once over the back of Nia's hand, a small calming motion left over from bedtime prayers and bus rides and overdue notices set face down on the kitchen table. Nia kept staring at the screen, but now her breathing had slowed. She could feel the building changing around her, not physically, but in the quieter way power shifts when a room realizes it can no longer pretend not to know. Ethan looked at Daniel. Notify the board that the meeting is postponed pending internal review. Lock document access on every file related to this vote. And have compliance meet me in conference room B in 10 minutes. Daniel nodded at once. Then Ethan faced Victoria again. His voice stayed low, but there was no softness in it now. You are relieved of this matter effective immediately. No one reacted out loud. They did not need to. The words landed hard enough on their own. Victoria stood perfectly straight, but the shine had gone out of the image she had worn for years. Not shattered, just emptied. Like a stage set once the lights come up and the audience sees the wood behind the paint. And in the center of that cold, gleaming hallway, under white lights and corporate silence, Nia Brooks suddenly understood something 9-year-olds are usually not supposed to learn so clearly. Sometimes the room is wrong before you enter it. Sometimes the adults with the best titles have the weakest truth. And sometimes all it takes to stop a lie from becoming permanent is one person small enough to be overlooked and brave enough to speak before the door opens. Conference room B was colder than the hallway, colder than it needed to be for a room that was supposed to hold strategy instead of confession. The glass walls looked out over lower Manhattan, all silver towers and moving traffic, but nobody inside seemed interested in the view. Ethan Carlisle stood at the far end of the table with the altered gray folder in front of him, both hands resting on the polished surface, while Daniel Mercer arranged printed logs beside a portable screen that still showed the frozen camera frame from 27. Compliance had arrived. 2 senior board members had arrived. So had the head of internal audit, a woman with rimless glasses and a legal pad already half full of notes. Victoria Hale sat 3 chairs down from Ethan, straight-backed and pale, but still trying to wear authority like a coat no one had officially taken from her. Near the door, Denise Brooks stood with Nia at her side, unsure if they were meant to stay or leave. The room smelled faintly of coffee, printer heat, and rain from somebody's coat drying on the back of a chair. Nia had never been inside a room like this before. She noticed everything. The water glasses with slices of lemon no one touched. The thick carpet that swallowed footsteps. The city reflected in the black tabletop every time someone leaned too close to the light. She also noticed the way adults changed when the door shut. In the hallway they had looked startled. In here, They looked careful. Careful meant danger too. Ethan glanced once toward Denise and Nia. Please stay. Denise hesitated. Sir, I do not want to make this harder. You are not making anything harder, Ethan said. You are here because the truth started with your daughter. Denise lowered her eyes for a brief second, not out of weakness, but because she was still not used to hearing respect arrive in a voice like his. Nia stayed close to her mother's side, one hand wrapped around the strap of her little crossbody bag. Her heartbeat calmer now, but still present like a drum under floorboards. Daniel began first. He always sounded like a man building steps out of facts. The annex in the executive binder differs from the server-controlled version in 3 material ways. 1. Voting control language was altered. 2. Footer codes do not match legal document control. 3. Print logs show the substituted pages were produced from guest terminal 27 at 9:27 p.m. last night. Camera footage confirms that Ms. Hale accessed the copy room with both binders at 9:21 p.m. and exited with the altered set at 9:26. No one interrupted. The internal auditor wrote steadily. One board member, a man with white hair and a red tie, removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose as though the details had weight. Victoria finally spoke when the silence turned too complete to survive. The annex language was under review. I made an executive judgment to correct a structural weakness in the voting threshold before this morning's session. Daniel turned slightly. Without notifying the chief executive officer, the board, or document control. Because the window was narrow, Victoria said. We had outside pressure. Delay could have jeopardized the transaction. Ethan's expression did not shift. So you decided. That urgency entitled you to conceal revision. Victoria looked at him with something like disbelief, as though she still expected him to remember old loyalties before new evidence. I decided the company needed protection. Nia heard that word and looked up. Protection. Adults used words like that when they wanted something to sound cleaner than it was. Denise's thumb brushed lightly over the back of her hand again. The same calm motion as before, but Nia could feel a change in her mother too. Denise was no longer standing like someone waiting to be dismissed. She was standing like someone refusing to shrink. The head of internal audit set down her pen. Ms. Hale, did you or did you not replace annex pages in the executive binder without disclosure? Victoria held still. I amended a packet that was not final. Daniel slid the server version across the table. Then why did you instruct scheduling to maintain the vote for 8:30 a.m. with no updated notice to council? Victoria did not answer right away. The board member in the red tie looked up sharply. You maintained the vote. Another director, a woman in a navy suit with a pearl bracelet, leaned forward. Did anyone else know? No, Daniel said before Victoria could speak. We found no circulation record for the altered annex. The room tightened again. Not loudly, just inwardly, like a knot pulled one notch smaller. Ethan walked around the table then, slow and precise, and stopped near the portable screen. He did not touch it. He only looked at the frozen image of Victoria in the copy room, her hand over the binder, the timestamp glowing in the corner like a witness that did not tire. All morning, he said, I have been told this is noise, confusion, misunderstanding, a child reading too much into what she saw. He turned toward the room. It was none of those things. It was concealment, and the only person who treated it with the seriousness it deserved was 9 years old. Nia felt every face turn toward her again. This time it landed differently. Not as scrutiny, not as doubt. Something warmer and stranger than that. Recognition. She looked down for a second because she was still a child, and even courage had its limits. But when she lifted her face again, Ethan was still watching her with that steady, unreadable focus of his. Nia, he said, and his voice softened by just enough to change the air in the room. When you saw Ms. Hale in the copy room, what made you decide to speak this morning? Denise shifted beside her, perhaps wanting to shield her from the size of the room, the titles, the pressure. But Nia answered before fear could rearrange the truth. Because she said you would not check if everybody rushed you. The words entered the room without decoration. No cleverness, no drama, just the clean edge of what had been heard. Ethan's face did not break, but several others in the room did. The woman with the pearl bracelet leaned back slowly. The red-tied director muttered something under his breath that sounded like regret. Daniel looked at the table. Victoria closed her eyes for one short second, and when she opened them the shine of control had dimmed to something flatter, harder, more human, and less impressive. Ethan let the silence live. He seemed to understand that some truths need a second landing after the first. "And why did you still speak?" he asked Nia. "If you were afraid?" Nia swallowed. Her voice came softer this time, but it did not tremble. "Because if I stayed quiet, then it would become true on paper." No one moved after that. The city beyond the glass kept going. A ferry cut a white line across the river. Taxis crawled through intersections 17 stories below. Somewhere in the building a phone rang and stopped. But inside conference room B, the moment held. Ethan looked down at the altered binder, then at Victoria, then back to Nia. Something unspoken passed across his face, not guilt exactly, but the recognition of how close power comes to disaster when it begins trusting titles more than character. He straightened. "Daniel, prepare a full report for the board and outside counsel. Audit every access point related to this transaction. Ms. Hale is suspended pending investigation." Victoria drew in a breath as if to protest, but no one in the room was standing with her now. The coat of authority she had worn so well was still on her shoulders, but everyone could see through it. Ethan turned to Denise then, and his tone shifted once more. Not formal, not distant. "Ms. Brooks, I understand that today has placed you and your daughter in an impossible position. It should not have. I intend to make that right." Denise blinked, caught between caution and disbelief. "Sir, we just wanted to do the right thing." Ethan nodded once. "That is exactly why you are still standing in this room." Nia looked from her mother to Ethan and then to the city in the glass, her own small reflection floating over steel and sky. For the first time all morning, the fear inside her eased enough to make room for something else. Not relief. Not yet. Something quieter. The beginning of being seen. The room did not empty all at once after Ethan Carlisle spoke. It loosened slowly, like a fist deciding whether or not to open. Chairs shifted back from the conference table. Legal pads closed. The internal auditor gathered her papers with the clipped focus of someone already building a report that would leave no corners for anyone to hide in. Daniel Mercer stepped into the hallway to begin calls with outside counsel and document control. Even Victoria Hale, for all her polished discipline, seemed less like the center of the room now and more like a figure left behind by the tide. But Nia Brooks still stood near her mother with the same strange feeling humming under her skin. The danger had not passed. It had only changed shape. Denise kept one hand on Nia's shoulder as if afraid that, if she let go, this whole morning might prove to be a mistake they would not know how to undo. The city beyond the glass was bright now, the late morning light falling hard across the river, turning the windows of neighboring towers into white fire. Nia could see their reflections in the glass wall beside the table. Her mother in a gray work apron that still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Herself in a navy hoodie that had belonged to a cousin last winter. Ethan Carlisle in a suit that probably cost more than the used Honda Denise had once saved for, and then lost after a transmission failure they could not afford to repair. They did not belong in the same frame. And yet there they were. Ethan looked toward the board members still seated at the far end of the table. "We will reconvene at a later date with corrected materials and outside supervision," he said. "Until then, no one discusses this transaction beyond retained counsel, audit, and compliance." The directors nodded one by one. Nobody argued. Titles still mattered in that room, but the tone had changed. People were no longer protecting momentum. They were protecting themselves from being the next person who had failed to see what was right in front of them. When the last director stood to leave, the woman with the pearl bracelet paused beside Denise and Nia. She looked at Nia for a moment with something closer to humility than praise. "You were very brave," she said. Nia did not know what to do with that, so she gave a small nod and pressed her lips together. The woman turned to Denise. "You should be proud of her." Then she left before Denise had to answer. Denise watched the door close behind her and let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in her lungs for years. "I just wanted to finish my shift," she murmured, half to herself. There was no bitterness in it, only exhaustion. Ethan heard her. He moved away from the head of the table and came to stand a few feet from them, close enough now that Nia could see the faint crease near one cuff where he must have rolled it once and smoothed it back down. Up close, he did not seem softer than before, just more human. less like a photograph in a business magazine and more like a man who had realized how close he had come to trusting the wrong person at the wrong time. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "how long have you worked in this building?" Denise shifted, instinctively formal. "A little over 3 years, sir. Different vendors. Same property." Ethan nodded once. "And your daughter comes with you often?" Denise hesitated, shame flickering across her face before she could hide it. "Only when school is closed or when childcare falls through. She sits quietly. She reads. She knows not to disturb anybody." Nia felt something twist in her chest at that. Her mother was still defending her presence, still apologizing for taking up space in a world that had never made room for either of them. Ethan seemed to hear that too. "You do not need to explain your daughter to me," he said. Denise looked up, startled. Ethan's gaze shifted to Nia then, and his tone changed in a way that made the room feel suddenly less cold. "You said something a few minutes ago that I have not stopped thinking about." Nia blinked. "Sir, you said if you stayed quiet, then it would become true on paper." He held her eyes as he said it, not indulgent, not amused, not speaking to her as if she were only a child. "That is one of the most accurate things anyone has said in this building in a very long time." Nia lowered her gaze for a second because praise felt hotter than fear. Fear made sense. Praise felt like sunlight after too much cold. She stared at the edge of the conference table, at the clean line where dark wood met polished chrome, and said the first honest thing that came to her. "I did not want my mom to get in trouble." Denise closed her eyes briefly. Ethan did not answer right away. When he did, his voice had lost the executive sharpness almost entirely. That should never have been the price of doing the right thing. Outside the door, footsteps passed and faded. Somewhere down the hall, a phone buzzed twice and stopped. The building was still moving, still billing hours and booking meetings and pretending the world could continue in neat straight lines. But inside conference room B, time felt slower, as if the morning had opened a space no schedule could close. Daniel returned then with a slim folder and spoke quietly to Ethan near the sideboard. Nia could not hear every word, only pieces. Human resources, vendor relations, immediate review, outside counsel by noon. Ethan listened without interruption, then took the folder and signed a single page with the same pen he had nearly used to sign away part of his own company. The image seemed to strike him too. He stared at the pen for half a beat before setting it down. Then he turned back to Denise and Nia. "I need an hour to finish what this morning started," he said. "After that, I would like both of you to join me in my office." Denise's body tensed again. Old instincts rising before hope had a chance to form. "Sir, if this is about access rules, I understand." Nia should not have come upstairs. Ethan shook his head once. "No, this is about what happens next." The words settled over the room. With a different kind of weight, one Nia could not yet measure. What happens next? Not punishment. Not removal. Something else. Denise seemed to hear the difference too, but years of disappointment had taught her not to trust possibility while it was still wearing an expensive suit. "All right," she said carefully. Ethan gave a short nod. Then, before turning back to Daniel, he looked at Nia one more time. "You did not interrupt my morning," he said. "You corrected it." Nia felt the sentence move through her like warmth reaching frozen fingers. She did not smile right away. She was too stunned for that. But she held the words close as Ethan stepped away, and for the first time since she had stood in front of the boardroom door, she let herself imagine that maybe this day would not end with whispered blame or a note in some security file. Maybe it would end with something rarer. Maybe being seen was not always dangerous. Maybe sometimes it was the beginning of everything changing. The hour passed more slowly for Denise Brooks than for anyone else in the building. Nia could feel it in the way her mother kept checking the old silver watch she wore on workdays, the one with a scratched face and a loose band that had belonged to her grandmother. They had been moved to a quiet waiting area outside executive offices on the 31st floor, far above the service corridors Denise knew by heart and far above the copy room, where everything had started. The carpet up there was thicker. The air smelled less like cleaning solution and more like cedar, leather, and expensive coffee. Even the silence had a different quality to it, softer somehow, as if noise itself had been taught not to rise too high around power. Nia sat at the edge of a cream-colored chair with her library book closed in her lap, though she had not read a single line in 20 minutes. Her eyes kept drifting to the floor-to-ceiling windows at the end of the waiting area, where the river flashed like hammered silver under the noon light. Boats moved in clean white cuts below. Helicopters crossed between towers. It looked like a different city from up there, one without overdue notices, busted bus routes, or laundromat dryers that ate quarters and still left clothes damp. Denise stayed standing. Most of the time, as if sitting too comfortably in a place like that might count against them. Twice an assistant had offered water. Once she had offered coffee. Denise had accepted neither. Nia knew why. Free things in fancy places rarely felt free to her mother. They felt like tests. "Mama," Nia said quietly after a long silence. "Are we in trouble?" Denise looked down at her, and for a moment the tiredness in her face showed without its usual shield. "I do not know yet, baby." She lowered herself finally into the chair beside her and smoothed the front of her gray apron, a habit she had when trying to make sense out of what could not yet be measured. "But whatever happens, I need you to remember something." Nia waited. Denise took a breath and turned fully toward her. "You told the truth. That matters more than whether rich people know what to do with it." Nia nodded, though the words sat in her chest beside another truth neither of them had said out loud. Truth mattered. But rent mattered too. Jobs mattered. References mattered. The world had never been especially generous to people who did the right thing at the wrong level of the ladder. A few minutes later, the assistant returned. She was a woman in her 30s with a neat bun, pearl studs, and the kind of calm smile that seemed practiced enough to survive chaos. "Mr. Carlyle is ready for you now." Denise stood so quickly the chair gave a soft sigh behind her. Nia slid down to the floor and adjusted the strap of her little bag. They followed the assistant through a corridor lined with abstract art and dark wood paneling until they reached a door taller than any door in their apartment building. The assistant knocked once and opened it. Ethan Carlyle's office was less flashy than Nia had imagined, and somehow more intimidating because of that. It was wide and clean and exact. Dark shelves, a massive desk, a sitting area with low cream sofas, one wall entirely glass, opening the whole city behind him like a backdrop too large to be real. There were no family photos in sight. No clutter. No trophies. Only order. Ethan stood near the window with his jacket off now, white dress shirt sleeves buttoned, one hand resting in his pocket as Daniel Mercer spoke quietly beside the desk. Both men turned when Denise and Nia entered. Daniel gave a brief nod and gathered his papers. "I will leave you to it," he said. Ethan thanked him, then waited until the door shut before addressing them. "Please sit." Denise hesitated, but this time she did. Nia sat beside her on the sofa, small feet not quite touching the rug. Ethan remained standing for a moment, as if choosing the right distance, then came around the coffee table and sat opposite them instead of behind the desk. Nia noticed that immediately. He could have spoken to them from 20 feet away with the skyline behind him like a crown. He chose not to. "Ms. Brooks," he said, his voice lower here than it had been in the hallway or conference room. "I have spent the last hour reviewing not only this morning, but several decisions tied to your vendor contract, floor access, and personnel structure. What happened today should not have required your daughter's courage to expose it." Denise folded her hands together in her lap. "Sir, I appreciate that, but I do not want special treatment. I just want to keep my job." Ethan's expression shifted, not with irritation, but with recognition. "That is not special treatment. That is the baseline you should have been able to count on." He glanced briefly at a folder on the table beside him, then back at Denise. "Vendor relations has already been instructed that neither you nor your employment status will suffer any consequence from today. In fact, your supervisor has received written notice that any retaliation, direct or indirect, will end his contract with this company." Denise stared at him, and for a second the room seemed to tilt under the weight of something she had never expected to hear spoken so plainly in her favor. "You did that. I should have done it years ago for people I never noticed were unprotected," Ethan said. He did not say it for sympathy. He said it like a fact he had only just grown honest enough to admit. Nia watched her mother's face carefully. Shock came first, then caution, then something softer, harder to name. Not trust yet, but the first fragile piece of it. Ethan turned to Nia then. "And as for you," he said, "I owe you more than thanks." Nia straightened a little. Praise still made her feel shy, but his tone did not feel like a performance. It felt careful. "You saw something adults missed because adults had trained themselves not to look at certain people too closely. That includes me." He paused, and the honesty in the pause mattered as much as the words. I was wrong about the room I was walking into this morning. I was also wrong about who in that hallway was worth listening to fastest. Nia looked down at her hands, then up again. I just did not want you to sign it. A small breath escaped Ethan, almost a laugh, but without humor. That may be the most direct executive counsel I have received all year. The corner of Denise's mouth moved then, just once, the first almost smile since the morning began. It changed the whole room. Ethan noticed that too. He reached for the folder beside him and opened it. Inside were several pages, neatly arranged. There is one more matter, he said. I asked for your personnel file, Miss Brooks. It is thin. Too thin. 3 years in this building, multiple vendor renewals, excellent attendance, no discipline, and not one recommendation for promotion. Denise looked embarrassed by the subject, as if being overlooked were somehow a private failing. I clean offices, sir. You manage an entire floor section with no complaints, train new staff, and cover emergency shifts, Ethan said. That is not just cleaning. That is responsibility without title. He slid one page from the folder and placed it gently on the coffee table between them. I am offering you a direct facilities coordinator position under corporate operations. Full benefits. Regular hours. No vendor middleman. Denise did not touch the paper. She only stared at it. Nia could hear the room hum softly around them, the air system whispering through hidden vents, a distant siren rising somewhere 31 floors below and fading again into the city. Sir, Denise said slowly, I have never had a desk job. It is not a desk job, Ethan replied. It is a management job, and from what I have seen, you have been doing pieces of it already without the pay, the title, or the protection. Denise's eyes shone then, though she blinked quickly and looked down before any tears could form. Nia knew that look too. It was what her mother's face did when Grace arrived, looking too much like a thing they could not afford to believe in. Ethan let the silence rest between them. He did not rush her. He seemed to understand that people who had gone too long without being chosen needed a minute to trust the sound of yes. Then he turned back to Nia and slid a second paper from the folder, smaller this time, with a cream envelope tucked beneath it. And for you, he said, there is something else. Nia looked at the envelope, then at him, and felt the room narrow again around the next breath. The cream envelope looked ordinary at first, which somehow made it feel more serious. It sat on the low glass table between Ethan Carlisle and a 9-year-old girl in a borrowed hoodie, its edges sharp, its paper heavy, her name written across the front in dark blue ink, Nia Brooks. Nia stared at it without reaching. She had learned early that things presented gently could still change your life in ways you were not ready for. Denise noticed the hesitation and rested her hand lightly against her daughter's back, warm and steady through the thin fabric. Ethan did not push the envelope closer. He simply folded his hands and let the moment breathe. Open it when you are ready, he said. His voice was calm, but there was something different in it now. Less executive distance. More care than Nia had expected from a man whose morning had started with billion-dollar votes and polished hallways. Nia looked at her mother. Denise gave one small nod, the kind mothers give when they cannot guarantee safety but want courage to move anyway. So Nia reached out. The paper felt thick beneath her fingers. Inside was a letter on heavy cream stationery embossed with the company seal at the top, and, beneath it, another sheet printed on bright white stock with the name of a private school on the Upper East Side that Nia had only ever passed on the bus. She frowned slightly, then looked up. Ethan saw the confusion and explained before pride or fear could fill in the wrong blanks. That is not a publicity gesture, he said. It is an academic sponsorship. Full tuition, books, uniforms, transportation, tutoring if you need it. I have also included a separate letter to the headmaster explaining exactly why I am recommending you. Denise inhaled sharply. Not loud, just enough to alter the room. Nia looked back down at the papers, then up again, trying to understand how words on a page could already feel heavier than the envelope itself. For school, she asked. For a school that sees what you can do, Ethan said. Nia blinked once. She had expected maybe a thank you card, maybe a gift certificate. Something adults gave children when they wanted to feel generous without changing anything important. This was not that. This was a door, and Nia had learned to be suspicious of doors that opened too easily in expensive buildings. Denise found her voice first. Sir, that is too much. Ethan shook his head. No. What was almost taken from me this morning was too much. This is proportion. Denise stared at him, caught again between dignity and disbelief. She is smart, she said quietly, almost apologetically, as if intelligence in a little black girl from their neighborhood needed to be offered with caution. She reads above grade level. Her teacher says she notices things other kids miss. But private schools like that are. She stopped herself before saying not for us, though all three of them heard it anyway. Ethan's gaze softened, not with pity, but with the kind of recognition that arrives too late and knows it. Schools like that have spent too long deciding potential by zip code, polish, and who knows how to speak in the room before they even walk in. I am not interested in repeating that mistake. Nia lowered her eyes to the letter again. The name at the top looked elegant and impossible. She imagined wide hallways, polished shoes, girls with neat ponytails and lunchboxes that matched their backpacks. She imagined herself walking in wearing thrift store sneakers and carrying the same caution she carried everywhere. The possibility felt bright, but brightness can hurt when you are not used to it. What if they do not like me? She asked before she could stop herself. The question sat between them, bare and honest. Ethan answered without flinching. Some of them may not. Some may underestimate you. Some may decide who you are before you speak. He paused, then let the truth finish itself. That does not make them right. Denise looked down then, her eyes shining despite every effort to keep them clear. Nia noticed and slid a little closer to her on the sofa. Ethan continued, but more gently now. This is not charity, Nia. This is investment. You saw what highly paid adults missed because your eyes were open and your conscience was intact. Those are not small qualities. They are rare ones. Nia traced the edge of the envelope with one finger. She did not fully understand words like sponsorship and headmaster and academic placement. But she understood being noticed for something other than a mistake. She understood someone saying the world should be larger than the block you were born on. Across from them, Ethan leaned back slightly, giving the room a little more air. There is something else, he said. He glanced toward Denise. The school has a strong arts and science program, but that is not why I chose it. I chose it because I called one of their trustees 10 minutes ago and told him that if they admitted your daughter, they would not be doing her a favor. They would be correcting a failure in what they have overlooked. Denise let out a breath that trembled at the edges. It was not just the offer. It was the language around it. No kneeling gratitude required. No smiling for a photo. No pretending that access had not been unfair in the first place. Nia looked from the letter to Ethan and asked the question that mattered most to a child whose whole world still fit inside the shape of her mother's schedule. Would I still live with my mama? For the first time all morning, something in Ethan's face broke into a real expression that was almost a smile. Yes, he said. Absolutely yes. Denise made a soft sound then, half laugh, half relief, and pressed her lips together right after, as if emotion were something she still needed to keep tidy in rooms like this. And the transportation? She asked, returning to practical ground, because practical ground had always been how she survived. Covered, Ethan said. Uniforms, books, school meals, after-school care if needed, and a laptop through the school's program. I have already spoken with their admissions office. Denise looked at him with a kind of stunned silence Nia had never seen on her mother before. Not because Denise lacked words. Because sometimes hope arrives so specifically that it takes language away. Nia turned the second sheet over and saw a list of classes, club options, library hours, chess, coding, strings, debate, robotics. The words glowed on the page like possibilities she had only ever seen in television commercials played between cartoons. Her chest tightened in a new way, not from fear exactly, but from how much wanting something can suddenly hurt when it stops feeling impossible. Ethan watched her carefully, as though he understood that too. You do not have to answer today, he said. You should talk with your mother. Think about it. Ask questions. But whether you accept it or not, the offer is real. Nia nodded slowly. Her eyes kept drifting to the school crest in the corner of the page. Gold and navy. A shield. A torch. She thought of the boardroom door that morning, of how small she had felt in front of it, and how she had stood there anyway. She thought of the copy room, the coffee stain, the crooked staple, the sentence that had pushed her past fear. If I stayed quiet, then it would become true on paper. Now another truth sat on paper in front of her. Different. Softer. bigger than she knew how to hold yet. Denise reached for the letter at last, not to take it away, but to steady it on the table between them as if anchoring something delicate against the wind. "Nia," she whispered, and her voice carried wonder now, thin and trembling and real. "Do you understand what this means?" Nia looked at the page once more, then at the city outside the glass, then back at the man who had almost signed the wrong life into permanence that morning. "I think," she said quietly, "it means somebody opened the right paper this time." Ethan did not speak for a second after that. He only looked at her with a stillness deeper than surprise, as if the child in front of him had once again found the one sentence in the room that told the whole truth at once. For the first time since Denise Brooks had stepped into Ethan Carlisle's office, the room felt almost warm. Not because the city outside had softened. It had not. The river still flashed hard under the afternoon sun, and the towers beyond the glass still stood like silver verdicts against the sky. But something in the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of waiting for bad news. It was the quieter, stranger kind that comes when life tilts and nobody wants to move too quickly in case the better thing disappears. Ethan sat back and let Nia's words settle where they belonged. Somebody opened the right paper this time. The sentence should have sounded childlike. Instead, it landed with the kind of precision board members spent years trying and failing to master. Denise looked down, one hand covering part of her mouth as if she were holding something fragile in place. Nia sat very still beside her, the cream envelope now open on her lap, the school letter resting against her knees. She looked smaller with the paper in her hands than she had looked blocking a boardroom door that morning, and Ethan seemed to notice that too. Courage in a hallway was one thing. Receiving a future was another. "There is one more reason I wanted you both here," he said after a long moment. His tone stayed even, but there was something heavier beneath it now, something less about gifts and more about debts. Denise lowered her hand slowly. "Sir." Ethan glanced toward the skyline once, just briefly, then back at them. "This morning did not begin with your daughter saving a transaction. It began with my company becoming the kind of place where a woman like Victoria Hale believed she could hide intent behind status and time pressure, and no one would question her fast enough. That does not happen in one day. It happens when people at the top convince themselves they see everything worth seeing." Denise said nothing, but Nia could tell her mother was listening with the deepest part of herself, the part that had spent years swallowing small humiliations because missing a paycheck cost more than pride could cover. Ethan leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees now, no desk between them, no skyline shield behind him. "I am responsible for that culture, whether I'm meant to create it or not." Nia looked at him carefully. Adults did not usually say things like that. Not adults with offices this high. They said mistakes were unfortunate. They said processes would be reviewed. They said language that sounded clean enough to survive on email. They did not usually say "I am responsible" and leave the sentence standing there with nothing to hide behind. Denise's voice came. Soft when it finally came. Most people do not say that out loud. Ethan's expression shifted by half a degree, something between regret and acceptance. Most people do not hear the truth from a 9-year-old before 8:30 in the morning. That drew the faintest smile from Nia, quick and surprised, and when Ethan saw it, his own face eased just a little. He reached for a second folder on the table, darker than the first, thicker, with several tabs marked in blue. "Beginning next week, we are restructuring facilities oversight and vendor reporting. Ms. Brooks, if you accept the position I offered, I would also like your input on something else." Denise looked wary again, though not closed. "My input? You know this building in ways my executive team does not," Ethan said. "You know where people cut corners, where communication fails, where contractors get ignored, where respect disappears once the badges change color. I can hire consultants to tell me what a hallway looks like on paper, or I can ask someone who has actually walked it at 5 in the morning." Denise stared at him as though the sentence itself required translation. Nia understood why. Women like her mother were asked to do more all the time. Cover another floor. Stay late. Train someone new. Smile through it. But they were almost never asked what they knew. Ethan continued before doubt could harden again. "I am forming a staff advisory review. Not ceremonial. Not for photographs. Real reporting lines. Real influence over policy. Paid, documented, permanent." Denise looked down at her apron then, at the faint crease near one pocket where cleaning cloths had rested for years, and Nia saw something pass over her face that she would remember long after the skyline and the office and the cream envelope had blurred in memory. It was not simple joy. It was grief too. The private grief of realizing how long you were capable of more before anyone in power bothered to notice. I spent 3 years trying to stay invisible in this building, Denise said quietly. That was how you survived? Ethan replied. I am asking whether you might be willing to help me build a place where the next person does not have to. The room went still again after that, but gently this time. Nia watched her mother breathe. In, out, slow enough to steady the ache that new hope can bring. Outside, the sun had shifted just enough to throw longer reflections across the river. Inside, the office held the hush of a decision larger than salary or title. Denise finally looked up. I would have to learn. Then we teach, Ethan said. I would have to trust that this is real. Then I will put it in writing. Denise glanced at the school letter on Nia's lap, then at the offer on the table, then back at Ethan. You really mean to change things because of this morning? Ethan did not answer immediately. He rose and walked to the window, standing with one hand in his pocket. The city spread beneath him like a map of every decision that had built his life and every blind spot that had nearly broken it. When he turned back, his face had that same stillness Nia had seen in the hallway, only deeper now, less defensive, more certain. No, he said. I mean to change things because this morning proved they should have been changed long before your daughter had to do my listening for me. Nia lowered her eyes to the letter again, tracing the embossed school crest with one careful finger. Denise sat straighter beside her, not all the way convinced yet, but no longer folded inward against disappointment. It was a small change in posture, barely visible, but Nia saw it. Children notice the first inch of healing before adults do. Ethan stepped back toward them and stopped near the table. There is a car waiting downstairs to take you home when you are ready, he said. Denise blinked. A car? Yes. And groceries have been arranged for delivery this evening. Denise's eyes widened instantly. Sir, that is not necessary. Maybe not, Ethan said. But neither was your daughter standing in my way this morning, and I am grateful she did. He picked up a slim business card from the table and placed it beside the envelope. This has my direct office line and Daniel Mercer's number. Not the switchboard. Not an assistant. If anyone at all, makes your life more difficult because of today, you call. Denise looked at the card as if it might vanish if she blinked too hard. Nia looked at it too, then up at Ethan. The thought came to her before she could decide whether it was too bold to say. Why are you being this nice now? Denise gave a soft gasp, half apology, but Ethan lifted a hand slightly to stop it. He considered Nia's question with the seriousness he had given every other truth she had offered him. Because being grateful is not enough, he said at last. And because kindness that costs nothing is usually just comfort wearing good manners. Nia held his gaze for a second, then nodded as if filing the sentence somewhere important. The light from the window caught the edge of the cream envelope, the dark business card, the unsigned offer on the table, and for a brief moment all three looked like pages from the same story, finally arranged in the right order. Denise reached for Nia's hand and squeezed it once. Ethan looked at them both, this mother in a gray apron and this little girl with blue beads in her braids and a school letter on her lap, and something quiet but decisive settled across his face. The morning had begun with a door nearly opening onto disaster. Now, in the hush of his office, another door stood open instead, and none of them, not even Ethan Carlisle, could fully see yet how far it was going to lead. By the time Denise Brooks and Nia stepped out of Ethan Carlisle's office, the afternoon light had softened from hard white to a pale gold that made the executive floor look less like a fortress and more like a place where people sometimes remembered they were human. The assistant with the pearl studs walked them to the private elevator without a trace of impatience, carrying the folders Ethan had asked them to take home. The cream envelope with the school letter rested carefully in Denise's hands now, as if paper could bruise if held too tightly. Nia walked beside her in thoughtful silence, one hand brushing the seam of her hoodie pocket, the other still warmed by the memory of her mother's grip. The elevator ride down felt longer than the ride up, not because of distance, but because everything inside Denise seemed to be moving in opposite directions at once. Hope pulled one way, caution pulled the other. Nia could feel it without her mother saying a word. She had grown up reading Denise in the small things, the way she rubbed her thumb over her, fingernail when bills were due, the way she cleaned the same spot twice when worry made her mind restless, the way silence lengthened around her when she wanted to believe something but had not yet decided it was safe. In the lobby, the doorman opened the glass doors before they reached them. Outside, a black sedan waited at the curb, polished so clean it reflected the whole block in stretched dark lines. Denise stopped when she saw it. "This is for us?" she asked, and the driver nodded with the quiet professionalism of a man used to rich people never asking that question. "Mr. Carlyle asked me to take you wherever you need to go, ma'am." Denise gave a polite thank you that sounded more stunned than composed. Nia looked up and down the street, half expecting the city to laugh and correct itself, to tell them they had misunderstood and needed to go back to the service elevator where they belonged. But the car stayed there. The driver held the rear door open. The river breeze moved cool between the buildings. Nothing snapped back. Inside the car, the seats smelled like leather and rain-clean air. Nia sat close to the window and pressed her fingers lightly to the glass as the city began to slide past. For a few blocks, neither she nor Denise spoke. The papers on Denise's lap seemed to weigh more than groceries, more than cleaning supplies, more than anything Nia had ever seen her carry. Finally, Denise let out a slow breath and said the words as if they had been pressing against her ribs for an hour. "Baby, our whole life might have changed today." Nia looked at her mother, then down at the cream envelope again. "Do you think it is real?" Denise stared out the opposite window at the blur of traffic, corner stores, scaffolding, and people rushing with shopping bags against their knees. "I think some of it is real already," she said. "The question is what happens when morning turns into next week, and next week turns into ordinary life again." Nia understood that too. Big promises were one thing. Ordinary life was where truth usually got tested. The car turned east, moving away from towers with mirrored windows and toward streets that looked more familiar. Brick apartment buildings, discount stores, a church with peeling white paint on the side door, a bodega where men in Yankees caps argued gently over scratch-off tickets. By the time they reached their neighborhood, the sky had taken on the duller gold of late afternoon, and the city sounded like itself again. Buses kneeling to the curb, sirens far away, music escaping from an open window on the third floor of a walk-up. The sedan stopped in front of Denise's building, and the driver stepped out to open the door for them. He did not make a face when he saw the chipped stoop or the grocery cart someone had chained to the fence. He just said, "Take your time, ma'am," and helped set the folders under Denise's arm without a hint of impatience. Denise thanked him again, more softly this time, and Nia followed her up the narrow steps that still smelled faintly of old cooking oil and bleach. Their apartment was on the third floor. Small, clean, 2 rooms, and a kitchen with cabinets that did not quite close right unless you lifted them first. The afternoon light came in weak through the blinds and painted thin stripes over the table where unopened mail sat in a tidy stack held down by a sugar jar. Denise set the folders on the table and stood there for a second, as if she had forgotten what people were supposed to do after carrying impossible things home. Then someone knocked. Both of them froze. Denise looked toward the door immediately, old instincts returning before reason could. Nia's eyes went to the cream envelope. Hope had taught them caution in a single day. Denise opened the door halfway. On the landing stood a delivery man in a navy vest holding a printed receipt board. Behind him, another worker wheeled and stacked grocery crates. "Delivery for Ms. Denise Brooks," the man said. "Prepaid." Denise blinked. "I think you have the wrong apartment." The man checked the label. "Third floor, Unit 3B, Denise Brooks." Nia slipped around the table and peered toward the hall. Crates of groceries lined the landing. Fresh fruit, milk, bread, rice, eggs, canned goods, produce still damp from the cooler. Cleaning supplies too, but not the dollar store kind. The delivery man smiled politely. "Where would you like us to set these, ma'am?" Denise stepped back without speaking. The men carried everything in, one crate at a time, stacking items carefully on the counter, by the fridge, along the edge of the table. The apartment seemed to shrink around abundance. Nia had never seen their kitchen look full enough to crowd the light. When the men left, silence came down over the apartment in a wave. Denise stood at the sink staring at the bags of oranges and the loaves of wheat bread and the cartons of eggs, as though they might explain themselves if she looked long enough. Then, very slowly, She sat down in the kitchen chair nearest the table and covered her face with both hands. Nia went still. She had seen her mother tired, angry, quiet, even hurt. But there was something different in the way her shoulders shook now. Just once, not from fear, but from the pressure of being held together too long, and then suddenly given room to feel. Mama. Denise lowered her hands and looked up, eyes wet but smiling in that broken, beautiful way that only happens when relief and grief reach a person at the same time. I am all right, she whispered. I just do not know what to do when something good arrives before I have time to be afraid of it. Nia came around the table and slipped into her mother's arms, and Denise held her tightly, the cream envelope pressing lightly between them from where it had slid under Nia's elbow. Outside, someone in the building laughed down the hall. A baby cried in another unit. The pipes gave their usual evening knock. The world had not transformed into something polished and easy. The wallpaper still curled a little near the corner by the stove. The rent was still real. The neighborhood was still the neighborhood. But the table now held groceries they did not have to count penny by penny. A business card with a direct line to someone powerful enough to keep a promise. A job offer. A school letter. Denise pulled back just enough to look at her daughter's face. You know what scares me? She asked softly. Nia shook her head. That this is the first day in a long time I can imagine more for you than just getting through. Nia did not answer right away. She looked at the groceries, the folders, the sunlight slipping lower over the table, and the small apartment that had held every version of their life so far. Then she looked back at her mother and said the only thing that felt true enough to fit the moment. Then maybe getting through is not the whole story anymore. Denise closed her eyes for a second and nodded. Across the room, the cream envelope caught the last line of sun through the blinds, glowing softly against the worn kitchen table like a piece of tomorrow that had somehow found its way home before either of them was ready. The next morning came in softly, with pale light slipping through the blinds and laying thin gold bars across the kitchen table where the cream envelope still rested beside Ethan Carlisle's business card and Denise Brooks's unsigned offer letter. For a few quiet seconds, before the pipes knocked and the bus brake sighed out on the avenue, and the woman upstairs dropped something heavy enough to remind the whole building it was still morning in the city, Denise let herself stand at the sink and look at the room as if she had never seen it before. The groceries were real. The fruit bowl was full for once. Milk sat in the refrigerator without being rationed in her mind before the carton was even opened. Bread, eggs, rice, cereal, fresh vegetables. All of it still there, still untouched by the usual math of what had to last and what had to stretch. Nia sat at the table in her school t-shirt and pajama shorts, knees pulled up on the chair, reading and rereading the scholarship letter as if the words might rearrange themselves overnight into something smaller and safer. They had not. They still said full tuition. They still said transportation. They still said recommendation. Denise watched her daughter's eyes move over the page and felt that same ache again, the one that had followed her to sleep and met her again at dawn. Not fear exactly. Not even gratitude. Something more delicate than either. The pain of realizing a better life had been possible all along if the right door had opened sooner. Eat something, baby, Denise said gently, setting a bowl of oatmeal in front of her. Nia lowered the letter and looked up. Do you think I should say yes? Denise gave a small laugh under her breath, tired and warm at the same time. I think most people would say yes before the ink dried. That is not what I asked. Denise leaned against the counter and folded her arms, thinking. Outside, the city was waking in layers. A horn, a siren far off, someone calling to a child on the sidewalk. Inside, their little kitchen held the kind of silence that lets truth arrive without dressing it up. I think, Denise said slowly, that some opportunities come with strings, and some come with expectations, and some come because someone powerful wants to feel generous for a day. But this one, she looked at the letter in Nia's hands. This one feels like it came because you were seen clearly. That matters. Nia glanced back down at the paper. The school crest looked official enough to belong to another world. What if I go there and everybody already knows I am the girl from the company story? Denise's expression changed. Not much. Just enough for Nia to know the question had landed somewhere tender. Then you let them know you are more than that story, she said. You are not a headline. You are a whole child. A knock came then, soft but firm, and both of them looked up instantly. Denise reached the door first this time, less afraid than yesterday, but still carrying old caution in her shoulders. When she opened it, a woman in a navy coat stood on the landing holding a leather portfolio and a canvas tote bag. She was in her late 50s maybe, silver curls tucked neatly behind her ears, glasses with thin gold rims, and a face that looked both intelligent and kind in the way that made people want to tell her the truth without being asked twice. "Miss Brooks," she said. "Good morning. My name is Eleanor Price. I am from Street Bartholomew Academy." Denise blinked. "From the school?" "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Carlyle called last night, and our headmaster asked if I would come personally." Denise opened the door wider without meaning to. "Please come in." Eleanor stepped inside and paused just long enough to take in the apartment without judgment. That mattered. Nia could always tell when adults were politely measuring what they thought you lacked. Eleanor did not do that. She simply smiled when she saw Nia at the table. "You must be Nia?" Nia nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor set her tote bag down carefully and took out a slim folder, a campus brochure, and a navy cardigan embroidered with the school crest. Then, from the bottom of the bag, she pulled a small stack of children's novels with library-style covers and laid them on the table as if gifts were supposed to arrive quietly and with purpose. "I thought I would answer questions in person," she said. "Paper can say a lot, but not always the part a family really needs." Denise pulled out the third chair for her and sat down slowly across the table. Nia remained where she was, the scholarship letter still in hand, the new cardigan folded beside her like a possibility she was not yet brave enough to touch. Eleanor opened the folder and turned it so they could both see. Class schedule examples, transportation routes, meal plans, a page titled Student Support, another titled Family Transition Resources. "Mr. Carlyle was very direct with us," she said, and a faint smile touched her mouth. "He said if we treated this like a favor, we should not bother offering it." Denise let out the smallest breath, almost a laugh. "That sounds like him." Eleanor nodded. "It also sounds like someone who was listening yesterday." Nia looked up sharply at that. Eleanor met her gaze without making too much of it. "I heard what happened," she said. "Not through gossip. Through the headmaster, who heard it through people who were ashamed they needed a child to remind them how attention works." Nia looked down again, embarrassed and oddly relieved at once. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her tone softening. "You do not have to prove anything to deserve a good education, Nia. You already deserved one before anyone important learned your name." The words changed the air in the kitchen. Denise sat back, very still. That sentence, more than the groceries, more than the ride home, more than even the offer letter, seemed to strike somewhere deep inside her. Years of strain showed in her face all at once, and then settled again. "I have worried about that since she was 5, Denise said quietly. That she would have to do something extraordinary just to be offered what other children get for ordinary reasons. Eleanor nodded once, not with pity, but with understanding. "Then let this be the moment that stops being true." She turned to Nia and slid the class list closer. "You like reading?" Nia glanced at the little stack of books. "Yes, ma'am." "Math?" "Yes, ma'am." "Science?" Nia hesitated, then nodded again. "Mostly when I can ask why." Eleanor smiled properly this time. "Good. Asking why is one of the healthiest habits a student can have, especially in rooms where adults assume you will not." Nia's fingers moved to the edge of the navy cardigan at last. The fabric was soft. New. It smelled faintly of clean cotton and the inside of a department store she had only ever walked through behind her mother at Christmas. "Would I have to start right away?" she asked. "Not tomorrow," Eleanor said, "but soon enough that the year still feels like yours. We would arrange a visit first. Meet the teachers. See the library. Walk the halls before the halls have a chance to decide who you are." Denise looked at Nia then, and Nia looked back, and something passed between them without words. The fear was still there. The uncertainty too. But now it had shape. It had names and routes and class lists and a real woman sitting in their kitchen explaining how the future might work instead of just promising that it existed. Eleanor took one of the books from the stack and held it out to Nia. "This one was my favorite when I was 10, she said. "I thought maybe it might be a good way to begin." Nia accepted it carefully. The cover was worn at the corners, not new like the cardigan, and that somehow made it feel more trustworthy. Somebody had loved it before handing it to her. She opened the front cover and found a note written in blue ink on the first page. "For Nia Brooks." May every room you enter become more honest, because you are in it. Nia stared at the words, then looked up at Eleanor, startled. That is from our headmaster, Eleanor said. He insisted. Denise put a hand over her mouth, eyes bright again in that helpless, tender way they had been yesterday. Nia closed the book slowly and looked around the kitchen as if seeing it from a small distance. The groceries, the sunlight, the striped shadows from the blinds, the stack of mail that suddenly did not look like the center of their life anymore. Then she looked at the cardigan, the class list, the woman from the school, and finally at her mother. "Mama," she whispered, and her voice shook just enough to tell the truth before she had time to hide it. "I think it is really coming." Denise reached for her hand across the table, and in the little apartment on the third floor, with buses hissing outside and oatmeal cooling in a bowl no one had touched, tomorrow stopped feeling like a rumor and began, quietly, to take a seat. 3 days later, the city wore the soft gray of early rain, the kind that turned sidewalks silver and made taxi lights glow like embers through mist. Nia Brooks stood in front of the tall iron gates of St. Bartholomew Academy, wearing the navy cardigan folded into her arms instead of on her shoulders, because she still was not used to the idea that something new and expensive and chosen for her could belong to her without needing to be returned. Beside her, Denise adjusted the collar of her own borrowed blazer and smoothed the front of the simple cream blouse she had bought the night before with more care than she used for anything she wore herself. Her new identification badge from corporate operations rested in her purse, still stiff from being printed, still unreal enough that she had checked twice before leaving the apartment to make sure it had not somehow become somebody else's by morning. The school rose in front of them, all red brick, tall windows, and old stone steps darkened by rain. Students moved through the entrance in clean uniforms with backpacks slung over one shoulder, their laughter carrying under umbrellas, their voices easy in a place that had already decided it was theirs. Nia felt the old familiar tightening in her chest, the one that came whenever a room announced its rules before she even walked into it. Denise noticed at once. She always did. She leaned down, tucked one damp braid gently behind Nia's ear, and said in the same steady voice she used for hard mornings in doctors' offices and every other doorway life had made them cross, "You do not have to become smaller to fit a bigger place." Nia nodded, though her fingers held tighter to the cardigan. A Blacktown car rolled quietly to the curb then, and Ethan Carlisle stepped out without umbrella or ceremony, rain beating on the shoulders of his charcoal coat before an aide hurried forward with cover. He barely seemed to notice. He was not dressed like a man attending a board vote now. No hard edges. No wall of executives. Just one man arriving early enough to keep a promise with his own presence. Denise straightened instinctively when she saw him, but Ethan lifted a hand lightly as he approached, stopping formality before it could turn into distance. "Good morning," he said, looking first at Denise, then at Nia. "I wanted to be here before you went in." Nia looked up at him. "You came?" Ethan's expression eased in that rare, small way it did when she asked him the plainest question in the room. "Some doors should not be opened alone," he said. Eleanor Price was waiting just inside the vestibule, holding a leather folder and a navy umbrella still shedding rain at her feet. With her stood the headmaster, a lean man with silver hair, warm brown eyes, and the kind of posture that came from long practice standing in old halls without letting the halls become his whole personality. He stepped forward as Nia and Denise entered, offering his hand first to Denise, not Ethan. Nia noticed that. So did Ethan. "Ms. Brooks," the headmaster said, "we are honored to welcome your daughter." Denise shook his hand with quiet care, like someone touching a future she still did not trust too quickly. "Thank you," she said. The headmaster then crouched slightly, so he was level with Nia's face, not towering over her, not talking down. "And Nia," he said, "I have been looking forward to meeting the student who reminded adults that attention is a moral skill." Nia blinked, then glanced at Ethan, who said nothing, only watched with that thoughtful stillness that meant he was measuring not status now, but character. Eleanor reached for the cardigan in Nia's hands. "May I?" she asked. Nia nodded, and Eleanor held it open while Denise slipped it gently onto her daughter's shoulders. The navy knit settled against Nia's frame as if it had been waiting for her. Too new, too clean, too good. And then, all at once, not too much at all. Just right. The headmaster led them through the main corridor where framed portraits lined the walls and rain tapped softly against leaded glass. Students slowed as they passed, curious but not unkind. A girl with freckles and a cello case smiled first. A boy carrying 3 library books held a side door open without staring. Little things. Ordinary things. But ordinary kindness has a way of feeling miraculous when your life has taught you to brace for the opposite. They showed Nia the library first. Sunless in the rain, but warm with amber lamps, oak shelves, and the hush of pages waiting to be turned. Nia stepped in and stopped. Books rose around her in quiet rows higher than the shelves at the public branch near their apartment, higher than any collection she had ever seen outside a store. For a second nobody spoke. The headmaster seemed wise enough to leave wonder alone when it arrived. Ethan stood a little behind Denise near the doorway, hands in his coat pockets, watching the expression on Nia's face with something that looked almost like relief. Eleanor walked her through the science room next, then the music hall, then a classroom with maps pinned in careful grids and a chalkboard already marked with the day's question in looping script. What do we owe the truth when telling it costs us something? Nia read the sentence twice. Ethan saw her do it. Denise saw him see it. The 3 of them stood in that classroom while rain traced silver lines down the window panes, and the moment felt stitched together by things none of them would have been able to explain a week earlier. After the tour, the headmaster asked if Nia would like a minute in the courtyard before they completed enrollment forms. The rain had eased to mist by then. Brick paths shone dark beneath the gray sky. Small white flowers clung to the edges of wet planters. Denise stayed under the archway with Eleanor and the headmaster while Ethan followed Nia a few steps into the open air, stopping at the center of the courtyard where a stone fountain hummed softly under the drizzle. Nia looked down at her reflection in the shallow water. Navy cardigan, blue beads at the ends of her braids. Small hands, big place. She looked, somehow, like herself and somebody new at the same time. Ethan came to stand beside her, not too close. How does it feel? He asked. Nia thought about that. Rain touched the stone rim of the fountain in tiny bright taps. Somewhere above them a bell rang once. Not loud, just enough to mark the hour. Like I am still me, she said finally. But the room changed. Ethan looked at the fountain, then at the school windows, then at the little girl beside him who had stopped a lie by refusing to let paper become fate. That is because the right room finally listened, he said. Nia turned toward him. Are you still changing your building? Ethan gave a small nod. Policies. Reporting. Hiring review. Vendor protections. More than I should have waited for. Nia absorbed that quietly. Then she asked, because of me? Ethan's answer came without delay. Because of what you revealed. There is a difference. She seemed to think on that for a long second, then nodded as if setting the sentence somewhere safe inside herself. Under the archway, Denise signed the final page with a school pin Eleanor handed her. Not hurried. Not trembling this time. Just steady. When she looked up, she found Nia across the courtyard in the navy cardigan beside the billionaire who had nearly walked into the wrong morning and then chose not to remain the same man after it. Denise smiled then, and the smile was not cautious anymore. It was tired, yes, and tender and touched by all the hard years that had led here, but it was whole. The kind of smile that arrives only when a person stops asking whether goodness is real and begins, quietly, to live inside its answer. Nia ran back toward her, slower than a child in a movie, faster than a girl trying to act brave in new shoes, and slipped her hand into Denise's. Ethan stayed where he was for one more second in the mist, coat dark with rain, the city waiting somewhere beyond the school walls. Then he gave them both a short nod and turned to leave, not because the moment was finished, but because some acts of gratitude are strongest when they do not linger long enough to become performance. At the gate, he looked back once. Denise stood beneath the archway holding enrollment papers in one hand and her daughter's fingers in the other. Nia, framed by wet brick and soft morning light, lifted the book Eleanor had given her against her chest like something she intended to keep for a very long time. Ethan did not wave. He only stood still for that one breath of time, as if committing the image to memory. Then he stepped through the gate and into the rain, and behind him the bell sounded again, clear and low across the courtyard. Nia looked up at her mother. Denise looked down at her daughter. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. The rain kept falling softly. The fountain kept humming, and in the window beside the old stone arch, a small black girl in a navy cardigan caught her reflection, held it for a second, and this time did not look away.